Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We are more than honored to be sitting down with renowned Austrian economist, Dr. Walter Block. Thank you so much, Dr. Block, for joining us today.
My pleasure. I don't know if I'm renowned, but I'll do my best.
You're at least a preeminent Austrian economist. I married into a family of Austrian economists, and they were very happy to hear that we would be having this discussion. So I want to start with what, in your view, is Austrian economics and what attracted you to it?
Well, Austrian economics, I'll tell you what it's not first. It's got nothing to do with the economics of Austria. It's named Austrian economics because the creators of it, Menger, Bombewerk, Mises, Hayek, all just happen to live in Austria. It's similar with the Chicago School of Economics, because the Chicago School of Economics has got nothing in particular to do with the city Chicago. It's just that the people who started the Chicago School were all in Chicago. They were at the University of Chicago, Milton Friedman and I don't know, Stigler and Becker and people like that. So now that I said what Austrian economics is not, let me say what it is. What it is a discipline of economics or a school of economics that has a certain view of economics. Other schools would be the Chicago School, the Public Choice School, the Marxist School, and the Austrian School. How does the Austrian School differ from all these others? Well, I'm not so sure about the Marxists. I don't even know if they deserve to be a school of economics. They're something, I'm not sure what they are. But you did mention that you'd want me to distinguish it from Adam Smith. So Adam Smith was a Marxist in some ways, namely he believed in the labor theory of value, but we can get into that later. To me, the essence of Austrian economics is not what most Austrian economists think of. Most Austrian economists think of Austrian economics as a particular view on microeconomics or on macroeconomics, on business cycles, monetary issues, things like that. I believe that there are sharp distinctions between the Austrians and others on all of those. But to me, the essence of it, the quintessential part of it is that it is not an empirical science. It's a science if you look upon science as systematic knowledge. Well, then a lot of stuff is a science. And Austrian economics is a science in that sense, but it's not an empirical science. An empirical science is you come up with a hypothesis, however you come up with it. You could just think of it offhand, or you see a correlation between a minimum wage and unemployment or something, and then you test it and you see if it's true or not. And Austrian economics is not an empirical science. So we're not a part of the logical positivist school of philosophy. We are more a branch of logic, if I had to categorize us in any way. We believe that there are certain premises, human action, people act, so as to make the future a bit more like what they would have liked to have occurred had they not acted. And from that, plus a few other principles or assumptions of scarcity of goods and people and resources, we have what we call apodictic necessary truths. Now, apodictic necessary truths doesn't sound like an empirical science, and it's not an empirical science. It's rather a branch of logic. For example, I notice you have some books right behind you. And you bought those books, there are about 10 of them, I don't know, you bought them for $100. And I say, knowing nothing about you, that you made a profit and so did the seller of the books ex ante. Namely, when you bought those books, at the time you bought those books, you value those books at more than $100. Maybe at 125. And the seller of those books probably valued them at $10 because he had plenty of copies. And he made a profit of 90 and you made a profit of 15. And this is necessarily true. And if you understand the English language, you can't falsify this. You can't come up with a case where, well, it wasn't true. Well, now look, I have to say one thing. You might not have liked those books, book schmucks, as far as you're concerned. You might not even read. I'm being silly here. Maybe you bought those books because the person who was selling the books, you felt sorry for. I don't know why you bought the books. All I know, there was something about the books. Maybe the books themselves, maybe the fact there was a pretty girl selling the books and you wanted to get a date with her. Maybe it was you felt sorry for the bookseller. I don't know why, but there was something about those books that you valued at more than $100. And when you bought them, you made a profit of the difference between how much you valued them and how much they cost you. And I'm assuming 25 because they cost you 100 and you paid 125. That's ex ante. Now, ex post, you might have regretted that you bought the books, although usually people don't regret they buy books, shirts, shoes, whatever, unless the shoes don't fit or something like that. Now, this is a synthetic a priori. Namely, it has something to do with the real world, and yet it's necessarily true. Whereas most economists, philosophers see economics as either it's synthetic or it's a priori. Either it's a priori statement, in which case it's a tautology, like all bachelors are unmarried men, or it's raining outside. And in order to see if it's raining outside, you got to go look outside, and it's falsifiable. Namely, if you if the sun's out, it's not raining, so you reject that hypothesis. And economics consists only of hypotheses, which can be falsified, and we only tentatively accept them because many, many times in the past we've done empirical research and we found that they were true. And that's the big, gigantic, stupendous difference between Austrian economics and mainstream economics.
You studied philosophy, and I was curious, did that lead to your interest in Austrian economics? Did it in any way also perhaps parallel as well? And then on the books, you know, one of my favorite types of books are those that are maybe out of print. So there's one by J.C. Penney about his 50 years of the Golden Rule, I think it's called. And it's out of print, costs about $100 to $150, I suppose, depending on the condition. So that's what appeals to me most. It's maybe perhaps like a silver coin. So back to the parallels between philosophy as well as Austrian economics in your experience and view.
Well, I was a philosophy major at Brooklyn College, and I was sort of a pinko. I went to high school with Bernie Sanders, and he and I were on the same track team, and we were sort of buddies. And my views and his views were about the same. And then Ayn Rand came to Brooklyn College to speak, and I came to boo and hiss her because she favored free enterprise. And everyone knows that free enterprise is fascism and leads to starvation and Nazis, you know. And I came to boo and hiss her. And at the end of the meeting, they said anyone could come to the lunch in her honor, even if you disagreed. And I wanted to convert her to socialism because socialism was the way to go. And there was this long table, and she was sitting at the head of it, and Nathaniel Brannon was there, and Ellen Greenspan, and Leonard Peikoff, and her crew, her gang. And I was relegated to the other end of the table, and I turned to my neighbor and I said, you know, socialism is great, capitalism sucks. And he said, well, I don't really know that much about it, but the people who do at the other end of the table. So I went and I stuck my head between Ayn Rand's and Nathaniel Brannon's, and I said, there's a socialist here who wants to debate someone on socialism and capitalism. I said, who is it? I said, me. And Brandon was very nice, very gentle. He said, well, you know, there's no room at this end of the table, but I'll come to the other end and talk to you if you make two promises. One, you don't let this conversation lapse. You keep going until we finish it. One of us changes his mind, or we really get a good innings at each other. And the other is you promise to read two books that I give you. One was Atlas Shrugged, and the other was Economics and One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt. And I read the books, and I went to his and Ayn Rand's house 4 or 5 times, and I was converted. I was then a libertarian, free enterprise, sort of like von Mises, like Henry Hazlitt, like Ayn Rand. But I was a philosophy major, and I really got the bug of libertarianism, and I was unsure as to what would be the best vehicle to promote liberty. Would it be philosophy or economics? So I took masters in both. Brooklyn College, masters in philosophy, City College in economics. And one semester I take 3 of the one and 2 of the other, and then 2 of one and 3 of the other. And finally I decided it was economics, a better vehicle. Austrian economics is a philosophical school of economics. So perhaps my background in philosophy got me closer to that. But the real reason I got into Austrian economics was Murray Rothbard. I met Murray Rothbard, and he converted me from an Ayn Rand limited government philosophy to anarcho-capitalism in about 10 minutes, using Henry Hazlitt's insights of, why do we have better shoes privately than publicly? Well, the competition, profit and loss. Well, why can't we apply this to armies, courts, and police? I was converted to anarcho-capitalism. But Austrian economics took me a long time because I was really into this logical positivist school, that if it's necessarily true, it's just a tautology. And if it has something to do with the real world, it's got to be falsifiable. Otherwise, it has nothing to do with the real world. And I couldn't get it through my thick head. It took me a year or two maybe to really get the idea that there are statements that are necessarily true and unfalsifiable. I've given you one, that a voluntary trade is mutually beneficial. I can give you another. Rent control lowers the quality and the quantity of housing compared to what it otherwise would have been. Necessarily true. Now, I did my PhD dissertation on rent control, and my independent variable was how much rent control did a city have, my observations with cities, and I had maybe, I don't know, 50, 75, 100 cities. And in 1946, all cities had rent control. Well, 45, and then some of them started decontrolling in 46, and then 47 and 52, 58, 65. New York City never did. So when I did my dissertation in I guess it would have been 1990 or so, I had many, many cities with number of years of rent control. And I held constant everything else I could think of that would have anything to do with the quantity or quality of housing, like wealth or crime or weather or who knows, whatever. And usually my dissertation came up with the right, what do you call it, signs, namely the more rent control, the worse housing. But every once in a while, you know what would happen? And I get statistical significance, but every once in a while I got the wrong sign. And sometimes it was statistically significant. My dissertation advisor was a guy named Gary Becker, very famous economist who later won the Nobel Prize in economics. And he was too nice to say what he really felt. What he really felt was, Block, go out and do it again until you get it right, you moron. He did say go out and do it again until you get it right. He never said you moron. He was too nice. But that's the way I felt. So what was testing what? Was my stupid dissertation testing the apodictically necessary claim that if you put barriers in the way of landlords, you're going to get less housing and lower quality housing? Or was it the other way around? Namely, the insight that we know from supply and demand analysis that rent control slows down the housing investment. Well, obviously, it was the other way around. So I adopted this policy that if you scratch a good economist, and Gary Becker was not a good economist, he was an excellent economist. If you scratch a good economist, they'll convert to Austrianism. So I try to convert him to Austrianism. Well, I didn't convert Ayn Rand to anarchism, and I never converted Gary Becker to Austrianism. I tried. But when he said, go out until you get it right, he knew what was right. I didn't have to test that. Namely, what's the word? The dog wags the tail doesn't wag the dog. Austrian economics wags the economics, not the other way around. Minimum wage law, rent control, free trade, all these things are apodictic, necessarily truths that good economists will agree on necessarily true. And this whole thing about testing is just a lot of malarkey, but they don't admit it. Like right now, they just gave the Nobel Prize to Card and two other guys. Card and Kruger did a study on minimum wage, and they New Jersey raised their minimum wage, Pennsylvania didn't, and then they studied, and they didn't find any more unemployment in New Jersey than in Pennsylvania. So they said, well, minimum wage doesn't create unemployment. Nonsense on a stick. It necessarily creates unemployment if you hold everything else constant. Now, you never hold everything else constant. So what's testing what? Look, if my productivity is $10 an hour and the minimum wage law is 15, and you hire me, you're going to lose $5 an hour. And if you do that with all your employees, you're going to go broke. So, and if the minimum wage is so great, why don't they raise it to 10,000 an hour? We'll all be rich. We can stop giving money to poor countries in foreign aid. We can say, hey, poor country, raise your minimum wage. You'll all be rich. This is imbecilic. We have recalls for cars and tires. We ought to have recalls for Card and Kruger and these guys that won the Nobel Prize in economics, and take their PhDs away and re-educate them, put them in re-education economic camp, namely Austrian type camp. These are necessary truths. And these people are testing whether minimum wage creates unemployment for unskilled workers. It's just preposterous.
If you're sitting across from Bernie Sanders, say at a bar or a lowbrow lounge, what would you tell him?
Well, first I have to tell you my Bernie Sanders joke. My Bernie Sanders joke is Bernie Sanders doesn't run away from anything. He started socialism way before it was popular, and he never ran away from socialism. He started this thing, not only that ex-convicts can vote, but convicts can vote. He never ran away from that. And he never ran away from anything. He's a very courageous person. But there's one person from whom he ran away, and that's me. Why? Because we're both on the track team together. He was one of the best runners in the city. I was a mediocre runner. We'd both start off at the same starting line, and then he would run away from me. I'd see the rear end of him around the track. So that's my Bernie Sanders joke. My Bernie Sanders, what I would say to him, well, I have invited him to speak. And when I invite him to speak, I also invited Ron Paul. And I like to give my students both sides. So I don't believe in ambushing people. So when I invite him, I'll just tell the Bernie Sanders joke and say we were boyhood friends. Now we disagree, but here he is. And then I wouldn't say anything critical. But if I got him in a bar or where we could let our hair down, what's left of it in my case, I would say, East Germany and West Germany. I'd say North Korea and South Korea. The same culture, the same language, the same IQ, the same history, the same everything. An act of war, and one of them went commie and the other went roughly capitalist, a mixed economy, and look at the results. And then I would say, you're a decent person. You don't believe in violence, initiation of violence. I now make you an offer. Come work for me for $3 an hour. I should go to jail for that? You actually going to put me in jail for offering you $3 an hour? Now, look, I don't have a gun. I'm not forcing you to pay to accept my offer of $3 an hour working for me. I'm just making you an offer. And by the way, here's a pen. I'm now making an offer. I'll sell it to you for $1 million. Should I go to jail for that? Why are you favoring the minimum wage law? Why are you favoring socialism when it just doesn't work? It doesn't help the poor. The richest in the capitalist countries, the poor have color TVs and washing machines. And in countries, Venezuela, even the middle class doesn't have that. They don't even have lights on all day. Those are the kinds of things I would try to convert him from his socialism to a free enterprise position.
The critique I hear at that point is that socialism hasn't been implemented before. What's your critique to that response or answer?
Well, getting back to North Korea and South Korea and East Germany and West Germany, the Bernies of the world could say, well, look, this doesn't really prove socialism didn't work, because if the leader of East Germany went over to North Korea and ran that country, and the leader of North Korea went over to East Germany and ran that country, then it would have been great. But it just so happened that the leaders of the country weren't good for whatever. I mean, you could say that. You see, you can't prove any of this empirically. And what I'm doing when I give you East and West Germany and North and South Korea is I'm giving you empirical cases. But I'm an Austrian economist. Well, I'm not above giving empirical cases when they're almost controlled experiments. Not quite. Because maybe the leaders weren't good, and maybe you didn't have the pure socialism. I mean, they had pretty good socialism as far as I'm concerned in East Germany and in North Korea. But you could always come up with this, well, they should have switched leaders. And what can I say? Can I say absolutely not? No, I can just say, look, under socialism, government owns all the means of production. There are no prices, or at least no prices that reflect scarcity. And even the Soviet Union, after the NEP, no, the first 5 years, 1917 to 21, they had pure socialism. And then they went to the NEP, the New Economic Program, because the whole thing was falling apart, and they had to go to the Sears and Roebuck catalog to get prices. Like, they didn't know, look, what's the best way to make railroad ties? Platinum or steel? Platinum is better. Platinum is stronger than steel. But it would be silly to waste platinum on railroad ties, because platinum you need it for, smaller things or other things. But in order to know that, you have to know that the price of platinum is very high and the price of steel is relatively low. But you don't know that unless you go to the Sears and Roebuck catalog, or you go and look at US prices or prices in Britain or whatever. So I would say things like that to try to convert him, but I don't think I'd have any more luck than I had with Ayn Rand or Gary Becker. I can't convert anyone. It's funny. I've been married to my wife. I've been with my wife for over 50 years, and she's still a pinko. And she threatens to out me every once in a while. Just kidding. And she says, well, I've been with him for 51 years. He hasn't converted me. He can't convert anyone. So don't listen to him. I'm having trouble converting people.
So was there an aha moment when you transitioned from socialism to libertarianism? Or how did that process?
Yeah, well, it was Ayn Rand and Nathaniel Branden. They converted me. It was reading Atlas Shrugged and Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt. I must have read that book, Atlas Shrugged. It's around 1,100 pages of small type. I read that probably in a weekend. I just couldn't put it down. That was an aha moment. Hazlitt Economics in One Lesson was very good also, but the aha moment was Atlas Shrugged. I think that's the best novel ever written. I know a lot of people are critical of it, but I'm a big fan of that book. That is a magnificent book. That was my aha moment.
Why is it so good in your view? Atlas Shrugged.
Well, I mean, it was just inspirational. It just showed in a visceral way that capitalism was the way to go, and every intervention that the bureaucrats pulled was just impoverishing people and unjust. The heroes were, John Galt and Hank Rearden and Dagny Taggart and the others. Ragnar Daneskjöld was one of my favorites. Attacking government ships because the government stole money from Hank Rearden. It was just magnificent. I'm not a literary person enough to give a good literary exegesis, but it really just jumped out at me and grabbed me by the throat and wouldn't let go. And every 10 years after I got converted when I was, 22, I've read it again. I must have read it 5 or 6 times, and each time I get more out of it. It is the best book ever written, best novel ever written.
I read that you are an atheist. And so I was wondering, where does the atheist sense of morality come from in your view? Where does your morality come from?
Well, by the way, I'm a pro-religious atheist, which sounds a little contradictory, but the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And I ask, well, who is my main enemy? As a libertarian, my main enemy is communism. And I ask, well, how did communism treat religion? And the answer is not too well. Look, we're having a competition for the hearts and minds of the people. And on the one hand, you have communism, and on the other hand, you have religion. So it's better to have a little dispute between them. People say, well, what was it, that thing that killed people, the religious thing that killed people?
The Crusades?
No, not the Crusades. Where they would put people to death for disagreeing. I can't think of it. They would
such as in the Massachusetts colony where.
No, in Europe. In Europe in the 15th, 16th, 17th centuries. I can't think of it. But you know how many people the Catholic Church killed? 5,000 over 3 or 4 centuries. I'll think of the word. You and I will think of the word later. How many people did the communists kill? Well, I don't know. Hitler, a communist. The National Socialist Party killed 11 million. Mao, 60 million. Stalin, 20 million. The Catholic Church is a bunch of pikers in terms of killing people. Now, look, I'm not in favor of killing 3,000 or 5,000 people, but compare. You have to compare things. The church is an alternative to communism, and so I'm pro-religion. I don't think that religion is necessarily a violation of rights. Now, if they impose religion on people, well, then that's no good. But most religions nowadays are not imposing their religious beliefs on people. If anything, they're more sinned against than sin, because they won't allow them to open up during COVID and this and that and the other. I'm an atheist, but I'm not really like an Ayn Rand atheist where, all religious people are evil. There are plenty of Lord Acton, a religious person who did wonderful work for libertarianism. So I'm a pro-religious atheist, if I can put it that way. I just don't believe in God. I don't think there's a God. I think that if God is omnipotent and benevolent, why do we have Hitler? And I've never, or Stalin or Mao, I never came up with any answer for that. I was converted to atheism by David Hume when I was about 12 or 13 years old. I read Inquiries Concerning Natural Religion. And David Hume, well, I was bar mitzvahed at 13, so this must have been when I was 14. Right after that, I became an atheist.
When I was very young, I used to listen to this band called Bad Religion, and I became an atheist as well. And I read a dissertation by the singer who has a PhD at Cornell, and he discussed sort of the naturalist philosophy from his view. And since then, I've been able to reconcile some of these questions through naturalist philosophy. To sum it up, like God is nature, nature is God. And of course, that doesn't line up with the Christian interpretation in many ways, but I think there is a basis through natural law, perhaps, for ethics and morality. And that's what I found in my experience, because how then would I have not gone the path of the traditional Judeo-Christian religions, for example, but then arrived at many of the same conclusions, actually, particularly when it comes to ethics and morality?
Well, I mean, the 10 Commandments have got a lot of good stuff in there. Don't murder, don't rape, don't steal, stuff like that. But I'm a libertarian, and I'm not. Libertarian is more of a theory of what the law should be. It's not so much a theory of morality, like it might be immoral to be disrespectful to your parents or to get drunk. But libertarianism addresses itself to a little sliver of morality, namely, what should the law be? And what it says is that the law should stop the initiation of violence. So we should stop murder, rape, theft, arson, kidnapping, and that's about it. And anything else might be vices, but it shouldn't be a crime. And so that would be my morality as a libertarian.
So in your view, what is libertarianism and why does it attract you? Why were you attracted to it?
Well, libertarianism is the one true faith, I guess. The idea that we should not aggress against each other. We should live peaceful lives with regard to each other. The essence of it is the non-aggression principle. Now, look, there's nothing wrong with aggression if it's defensive or if it's agreed upon. Look, you and I are going to get into a boxing match and you punch me in the nose. I can't complain of assault and battery because we've agreed to be hit above the belt. Or sadomasochism, they agree to, whip each other, adults. That should be maybe a vice, but not a crime. But anything else, murder, rape, theft, arson, kidnapping, are vicious, nasty things. And I think it's wrong to do those things. And also, I think that if we stop doing those things, we'd all be happier, more prosperous lives. So I think that, see, most people will agree with this stuff. They'll say, I don't murder, I don't rape, I don't steal, I don't commit arson. It's just that their adherence to this philosophy is only skin deep. when it comes to the minimum wage, they'll be putting people in jail for offering $3 an hour, which doesn't violate the non-aggression principle. Taxes, I didn't agree to pay taxes, and now they're telling me that if I don't pay, I'll go to jail. Well, that's not compatible with libertarianism either. So I think libertarianism is righteous. I think it's the one true philosophy in terms of ethics and morality.
And on that note, I think this is a misunderstanding of many people who criticize, I wouldn't necessarily call them critics, libertarianism. So I'm wondering, could you kind of discuss, like, how does man look out for the public welfare in a libertarian society?
Well, in a libertarian society, all interaction would be voluntary, and all voluntary interaction is mutually beneficial. So we're going to be a lot richer if we had libertarianism than not. Let me give you an example. Right now, do you know how many people die on the nation's highways? Something like 40,000 every year. 40,000 people die every year, and these are government roads. One of my books is we should privatize all the highways. Well, the reason we have pretty good books and pretty good shoes and pretty good shirts and pretty good corn and pretty good bread is because of competition. Well, why shouldn't we have competition in road ownership? You make the rules of your road, I make the rules of my road, and we see which is better. Right now, the minimum speed is 40 miles an hour on the highways, and maximum of 70. Would it be better if each lane had its own speed limit? Maybe it should be 50, 60, and 70. Maybe it should be 60, 70, and 80. I don't know. But if you tried 60, 70, and 80, and I tried 55, 70, and 85, and then one of us had fewer deaths, well, then we'd learn. Whereas right now we have one rules of the road from Washington, D.C., and there's no competition. If my road is lousy and your road is great, well, you'll be able to take over my road and make my road as safe as yours. So that would be one example of where we would be much better off if we had libertarianism. And there are many, many more examples that I could, of course, come up with.
You mentioned earlier Smith's adherence to the labor theory of value. I'm curious, why was he wrong about that?
Well, the labor theory of value is a theory that Adam Smith had, and Adam Smith was a little inconsistent with it because he deduced capitalism from it, whereas Karl Marx was more consistent, because if the labor theory of value is correct, then labor should get the entire GDP. Whereas labor right now gets about 75% of the GDP. The rest of it goes for profits, interest, income, rent, whatever. So if the labor theory of value is correct, the reason things are valuable is because they've got labor inputted in them. But it's easy enough to show that the labor theory of value is wrong, because a mud pie and a cherry pie both have the same amount of labor put into them. And yet the mud pie isn't worth anything and the cherry pie is worth a lot. You could bend down and pick a gold nugget or a diamond as big as your fist, and it's worth a ton. And yet you didn't put any labor in it, hardly. And another proof that it's wrong is you have a car, and your car keeps changing in value based on supply and demand. And yet the labor in it initially doesn't change at all. So if labor was so definitive in determining the value of your car or your house or your chair, the value would never change, because the value of labor put into something never changed because it was historical. So the labor theory of value is just all wrong. Now, sometimes what they'll say is, well, in the mud pie, there wasn't the socially necessary labor put into it. It was socially unnecessary. But the way they determine what's socially necessary and what's not is by arguing in a circle. Namely, they're going to say that the mud pie was not socially valuable, whereas the cherry pie, the labor was. So it's just a nonsense. What determines value is supply and demand. And people's desires for things, and that's how you get the value of things. Now, labor is important. Who can deny that? But there are things that have very little labor and they're worth a lot, and things that have a lot of labor and they're not that worth much. I mean, at one time, the frisbee and the hula hoop were very valuable. Everyone wanted one. And then all of a sudden, people didn't want them, and they had the same amount of labor in them, and yet their value changed. So what's with the labor theory of value?
There's a certain disdain for capitalism today. And there's certain notions that rather than living in a capitalist society, we live in what's, I think, euphemistically called a crony capitalist society. So I guess my question is the critique of capitalism founded? And if not, why is it good?
Well, we do live in a mixed economy, which is really a crony capitalist society where various people get subsidies and protections and tariffs against competition. One dramatic example of that is when Uber and Lyft came in. The taxi cab companies didn't much like it, and they try to get laws passed against it. Well, you know, in the free market society, Uber is just another capitalist act between consenting adults, to use a wonderful phrase of Robert Nozick, and the powers that be don't like it. Milton Friedman was very good on occupational licensure with doctors. There's the FDA, Food and Drug Administration. We'd be much better off with a competitive industry that certified the quality of food and drugs. So we have a lot of interventions, a lot of mixed economy, a lot of fascism. We don't have too much socialism in this country, because remember, socialism is government ownership of the means of production. You don't have too much of that in the U.S. Rather, the U.S. is more of a fascist country, because we have heavy regulation. It's sort of like the Nazis. Stuka and Volkswagen and Mercedes-Benz, they were all private companies, but Hitler told them, you know, what to do and what you can't do. The same with Mussolini. So we're more of a fascist country than a socialist country. Bernie Sanders, to the contrary, notwithstanding. Even Bernie is more of a fascist than a socialist, because fascist economics means government control. Socialist means government ownership. And Bernie is calling for nationalization of this and that and the other, but most Democrats aren't calling for nationalization of oil companies or airline companies or things like that.
Is the fear of Marxism founded in terms of there being some pushing or nudging in that direction? And also, why does Marxism make us all poorer?
Well, I think we should fear it. Not only should we fear the move toward socialism or fascism, we should also fear the movement toward wokeism and critical race theory and stuff like that. I mean, what the Marxist was saying that the rich people necessarily exploit the poor. Well, some rich do exploit the poor, but then some poor exploit the rich. The reason for exploitation has got nothing to do with you're rich or poor. Somehow if I employ you, I'm exploiting you? Nonsense. Whereas the critical race theory, instead of saying the rich exploit the poor, it's the whites exploit blacks, and men exploit women, and straights exploit gays and other such people, which is equally silly. Yes, some whites do exploit some blacks exploit some whites. The reason exploitation occurs, or what exploitation consists of, has got nothing to do with skin color. You know, Martin Luther King nowadays would be canceled, because he said we shouldn't judge people by the color of their skin. We should judge them by their character or by their ability or whatever. There was this guy, I forget his name, he was supposed to give a speech at MIT as to whether there's life on other planets. And they canceled him because he wrote in Newsweek, that the way we should hire people is based on their merits, based on their ability, not on their skin color or their sexual proclivities. And for that, he got canceled. I mean, yes, we should fear this. This is lunatic. Look, we want to get rid of COVID, don't we? Well, do we want laboratories that look like America? Or do we want laboratories with the best people, the best scientists in them? Well, obviously, if you want to cure COVID, you get the first team in there. You don't get the bench warmers. You don't get people just because of the color of their skin. I don't care if they have pink and blue skin and green skin. If they're competent, they should be in the laboratory. And if they're not, they shouldn't be. If we want to stop COVID, if we want to stop cancer, if we want to, save the world, if we want to save the environment, you need ability, not skin color. Skin color should be irrelevant.
How would you explain what's going on in the world today with all the different factors?
There's a Yiddish word, it's called Misha Gas, craziness. That's how I would explain it. There's a lot of craziness going on. There was this guy in California who was trying to tell his students, don't say and ah. He was teaching public speaking. And when you teach public speaking, you're not supposed to go and ah. And he was trying to give examples. So he gave a Chinese word that sounded like the N word. It sounded a little bit like it, not really. And according to Chinese people, he had pronounced it correctly. He was just trying to tell his students, don't say the N word. And he was trying to make it dramatic by using other cultures and other languages. And the students said, oh, well, he's a racist pig. Not a racist pig. He was just trying to help kids, be better public speakers. And he got in all sorts of trouble with that. Well, this is just social justice wokeism and what is it? Trigger warnings and stuff like that. It's just crazy. I mean, I'm a big fan of John Stuart Mill, who says, we should allow debates. But we don't allow debates. Even in the COVID thing, if an epidemiologist disagrees with the mainstream, they try to cancel him. And if a doctor disagrees, they'll try to take the doctor's license away. And then they say, well, we're relying on science. Well, science means open debate. It doesn't mean canceling people if you have a different kind of a view.
How about economically speaking? There's so much going on. I think for the first time, many Americans are probably going to the grocery store and experiencing shortages. I think there's shortages of spring water, for instance. There's less meat on the shelves, etc. And then there's also this quote, supply chain crisis, which is ongoing. What is the Austrian view of the now economically?
Well, I don't think there's any particular Austrian view. The good mainstream economists also have the same viewpoint, namely, prices are not flexible. Prices not allowed to look. If you have a shortage of truck drivers, their wage is supposed to go up, and that's supposed to attract people into it. But if you don't allow gigs, because you favor unions, well, then you're boxing up, sometimes we've got plenty of stuff here, but no truck drivers, and plenty of trucks, but no truck drivers to bring the stuff from the ocean, from the ports to Walmart. And then you have all sorts of things where if you earn an extra $1,000, you lose 20,000 in terms of benefits because you get pushed into a higher income bracket. So you don't take a job that is necessary. Then Biden keeps giving people money for not working. And sometimes he gives them more money for not working than for working. Sometimes he only gives them 3/4 of what they could earn for not working. And they say, well, why should I work for 25% of my salary? I'll sit home and watch TV. So you have empty shelves and you have piles of stuff on the ports and gas prices are going through the roof because of inflation. The government is printing money like a drunken sailor. Apologies to sailors. The Fed is going berserk. So I think these are, and then Biden loves unions. Bernie Sanders is a big union man. And now there are all sorts of strikes going on. And, in a free society, if you want to go on strike, fine. You want to leave your job, fine. But then you can't hassle replacement workers. You can call them scabs if you want. Well, that should be hate speech, but you shouldn't be able to preclude them from taking the job that you're renouncing. But we're getting more unionism. So unionism and taxes and subsidies are all bollocksing up the economy. And, Mencken once said that people who do something deserve to get it good and hard. Well, people who voted for Biden deserve to get it good and hard. And this is what they're getting. They're getting gasoline prices up through the roof. They're getting empty shelves. They're getting hospitals not able to take cancer patients or heart attack patients because of the COVID situation, which they're mismanaging. I think those are some of the explanations as to why we have the supply chain difficulties.
If it's a binary question, does Dr. Walter Block favor Donald Trump over Joe Biden?
Oh yeah. Oh, I mean, Biden was a socialist or a fascist or whatever. Now, look, Donald Trump was no Ron Paul, but the joke is, the Economist was asked, "How is your wife?" and the answer was, "Compare to what?" You have to compare it to something. Well, Trump wasn't that great, and he had the personality problems, but compared to Biden, I think Trump would have been much better. And the same thing with Trump versus Hillary. I think Hillary would have been a very bad president because she also is an interventionist. Now, look, Donald Trump is a little weak on foreign trade and tariffs. But by and large, he favors lower taxes and less regulation. And lower taxes and less regulation is what the economy now needs, not more regulation and higher taxes.
Bitcoin came out in 2009. It was written about first in 2008. There are theories out there that it was inspired by Austrian economics. It has a deflationary coin supply, assuming increased attention or demand for it. That is essentially, in my opinion, a technological statement on the inflationary policies of central banks. As Henry Hazlitt said, inflation leads to reckless spending, which probably isn't very good for the environment, for the environmentalists out there, and ultimately fascism and communism. With 21 million Bitcoins to be mined, kind of inspired by gold, which is an interest of Austrians, through 2140, there certainly are some parallels. Furthermore, in the code itself, in the Genesis block, Satoshi Nakamoto references money printing in the UK, chancellor on brink of second bailout. So I'm curious, what's your view on Bitcoin? And then maybe also, is there sort of an Austrian view?
Well, you see, Austrianism is a positive science, not a normative science. Austrianism only asks questions like, or answers questions like, what causes what? It doesn't say, what do you favor? It's not an ethical system. It's just what causes what, how do we account for inflation, what causes the business cycle, things like that. It can do if-then statements. It can make statements like, if you want not to have business cycles, well, then get rid of the Fed. But it doesn't say get rid of the Fed, because that would be an ethical statement. It can only do if-then statements. As a libertarian, I would say I certainly favor Bitcoin compared to the US currency, because Bitcoin is a voluntary enterprise, whereas fiat currency is based on coercion. And as an Austrian economist, I could say there are limits to how many Bitcoins we can have, because you've got to go in, you call it mining, but you have to go and you have to do a lot of effort to get another Bitcoin. So there's a natural limit as to how many Bitcoins we can have. Whereas there's no, I mean, all you do is add a few zeros to the dollar and you're off to the races. I don't like to brag, but I'm very wealthy. Do you know that I have a Zimbabwe dollar bill for $1 trillion? I'm very rich. I'm kidding here. I mean, you get $1 trillion or a quadrillion dollar bill from Zimbabwe. I mean, the reason we had Hitler in the first place is because the 1923 what do you call it, hyperinflation. The 1923 hyperinflation just screwed up Germany beautifully, or horribly, I should say. And that's a lot of historians trace the rise of Hitler to that. So money is very, very important, not just because the more you have, the richer you are, but it's very important. So I certainly favor Bitcoin vis-a-vis US currency. The only problem I have with Bitcoin is you need electricity. Without electricity, you don't have any Bitcoin. Now, it's true we have generators, but the way we're going, you're not going to have any oil to run the generators, so we're not going to have Bitcoin. So I also like the gold standard. Why do I like the gold standard? Because whenever we were free to choose, we chose gold. Now, Milton Friedman had this series called Free to Choose. And guess what Milton Friedman's view was on gold? Bitter opponent. He was he favored a 3% rule of the Fed. He supported the Fed. So I'm not a big fan of Milton Friedman on that issue. The reason, I mean, look, why do we have to have money? We have to have money because of double coincidence of wants. I have a pickle and I want a chicken. Do you know what the odds of me finding somebody who's got a chicken and wants a pickle? Very difficult. So what I'll do is I'll take my chicken and I'll turn it into salt. On the ground that salt will be acceptable, and you have a pickle, and even though you don't want salt, you'll take you'll take my chicken for salt, and you'll go out and buy the pickle somewhere else. Well, now what would be a good intermediary? Salt would be a pretty good money. How about bananas? Bananas wouldn't be a good money because they fall apart after a week or so. How about cement? Well, not valuable enough per weight or per cubic. What about diamonds? Diamonds are a lousy money because you can't make change in them. You break a diamond in half, and I think it's the two pieces are worth 1/8 of what the total was. So gold was very good money. Gold and silver, whenever people were free to choose, they chose gold. The government doesn't like gold because you can't inflate it. And the government only has 3 ways of raising money. One is taxes, and everyone knows who's responsible for taxes. You can't blame taxes on private sector. The other is borrowing, but you have to pay it back. And the third is inflation. They love inflation because they can blame it on, greedy consumers. That's what the Psaki is now blaming the empty shelves. The consumers are too greedy or some crazy thing like that. So my hierarchy would be whatever the free enterprise system picks, which was gold. Secondly, Bitcoin, because that too is part of the free enterprise system, but it only came about because gold was squelched. I'd like to see a fair fight or a fair competition between the Bitcoin and gold. And I think gold would win out, but I'm not sure, and I don't really care. It's sort of like, what's my view? Should we have chocolate ice cream or vanilla ice cream? I have no views. Whatever people want. So my view on gold versus the Bitcoin is whatever people want. If they want Bitcoin, fine, I'm a Bitcoiner. If they want gold or copper or whatever for lesser coins, that's fine as well. But I would be very much opposed to fiat currency.
Do you have any comments on that? In the US Constitution, the US monetary system was laid out to be a bimetallic standard based on both gold and silver. And I might add, I forget his name, but there's a historian who is ardently I think monetary historian back in the 19th century who basically said silver or death. And in his view, he was an ardent believer in the necessity for there to be not only a gold standard, but also a silver standard. So in the constitutional sense, how do you make that? What do you make of that, as well as just perhaps any other thoughts?
Well, I'm not a big fan of the Constitution. The Constitution was not a voluntary contract. It was sort of crammed down to people, but it was pretty good if interpreted by Ron Paul or by some sensible people, not by other Supreme Court judges. But I'm not really a fan of bimetallism, unless there's flexible exchanges between the two. Namely, there's no price control between gold and silver. And I would say probably in equilibrium, there would only be one, and it would be gold probably. But if it was silver, again, I don't care if houses are painted blue or green or whatever the market wants. I'm a marketeer. So I think that it would be easier to have just one coinage for the whole world. Because then you wouldn't have to make exchanges in gold and silver. Now, look, if gold was the money, platinum would still be valuable, copper would still be valuable, brass, other metals, steel, whatever. It's just, would they be used for money? Would they be used to facilitate trades? And my expectation would be just one of them, whether it would be gold or silver. I don't know, and I don't care. I suspect gold, but I'm not sure.
I see that perhaps some overlap with the conservative movement. Everybody's gotten a little bit more politically activated, especially in the last 2 years, but particularly perhaps even also since the advent of the internet. So I'm curious now, do you see overlap between the American conservative movement and perhaps physical silver holdings, and even perhaps using it in small towns in particular?
Well, it's interesting. A lot of people say libertarians are closer to conservatives than to liberals, and I don't really think so. I think conservatives are a little bit better on economics than liberals. Okay, a lot better. But on personal liberties, I think the left is better than the right. I mean, it's the left that wants to legalize drugs and sex between consenting adults and stuff like that. So I'm sort of neither a fan of conservatives nor liberals. I mean, yes, the Federalist Society is both conservatives and libertarians, and that's good. But the ACLU used to be libertarians and liberals, although the ACLU went woke. But take FIRE, Foundation for Independence in, I forget, in Education, FIRE. They defend both. They defend people on the left and people on the right, and they're very, very libertarian. I'm a big supporter of FIRE and IJ, Institute for Justice, which is sort of I don't know, helping the poor. So maybe they have left-wing credentials as well. And the connection of conservatives and money, the conservatives that I know of are not really that interested in monetary issues. And to the extent that they are, they're not favoring Bitcoin, nor are they favoring gold. They're moderate supporters of the present system. So I'm not a big fan of conservatives on that. I promised you an hour. We've only got 2 more minutes, so maybe one more comment or question.
You were thinking of the Inquisition, I believe.
Inquisition, that's it. Thank you. I'm getting senile thanks to you. The Inquisition is the exact word. It killed some 3,000 to 5,000 people, which is very bad, over 4 centuries. Compared to what the commies did, a drop in the bucket.
Hope for humanity. What's your hope for humanity?
Libertarianism.
We've had the honor to sit down and speak with Dr. Walter Block. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun. I really appreciated your very good questions and comments. Thank you.
And thank you everyone for listening.
Thanks for watching the show. I hope you enjoyed it. Head on over to GoldSilverBitcoin.com, where we have a store where we're selling precious metals. If you have Bitcoin, you can send those to us. We'll send you gold and or silver, whatever you're choosing. Alternatively, if you have gold and silver and you want Bitcoin, feel free to send us the gold and silver and we will send you Bitcoin. This is a service that we provided for clients since 2012, since when we were opened. You can also peruse the store and see we have all sorts of prep and survival gear, storable food, etc. So thanks for watching the show, and thanks for heading on over to GoldSilverBitcoin.com.